An old veteran complained about my coffee every day. His final gift changed everything. You know that smell when grease mixes with cheap coffee in yesterday's dreams? That's my world. Welcome to the Crossroads Diner, where I've been slinging hash for the past 6 years, watching life pass by through windows that haven't been properly cleaned since the 90s. My name's Jake, and if you saw me on the street, you'd forget me in about 3 seconds. Average height, average build, the kind of face that blends into crowds. The only thing not average about me is how spectacularly I've managed to mess up my life. But hey, at least I'm consistent. The Crossroads sits right off Route 22, one of those joints that time forgot, but truckers remember. Red vinyl booths held together with duct tape that we try to hide under the tables. Fluorescent lights that buzz like dying insects. The kind of place where the coffee's always too bitter and the pie's always yesterday's. But nobody complains, because where else are you going to go at 3 in the morning? I work the morning shift, 5 to 2, Tuesday through Saturday. Know why I picked those hours? Because that's when I can see my daughter Lily on Sundays. 8 years old, brightest thing in my universe. And every other weekend she looks at me with those big brown eyes and asks why she can't have the sparkly sneakers all her friends have. $68 at Target. Might as well be $600. The regulars here, they're my daily entertainment. There's Betty, who's been coming in every morning since her husband died in '08. Orders the same thing, scrambled eggs, wheat toast, no butter. She leaves the butter packets on the table, though, arranges them in a little square. Never figured out why. Then there's Tommy, the mailman, always checking his watch like the mail's going to deliver itself if he's 5 minutes late. Guy's been divorced 3 times, and I'm pretty sure it's because he treats his mail route like a military operation. He told me once that punctuality is the courtesy of kings. I told him kings probably didn't have to deal with Mrs. Henderson's aggressive chihuahua. But the real character, the one who made this place bearable, was Mr. Arthur Gable. 80-something years old, moved like his joints were made of rusted metal, and had a personality that could curdle fresh milk. Every single morning, 7:15 sharp, he'd shuffle in, take the corner booth, always the corner booth, and order black coffee and wheat toast. Often stayed right through till lunch, nursing that same cup of coffee like it held all the world's secrets. The ritual never changed. I'd pour his coffee, he'd take a sip, make a face like I'd personally insulted his mother, and declare it tasted like something I can't repeat if the story ends up on YouTube. Let's just say it rhymed with ship water. And every morning, I'd grin and say, "Made it special for you today, sir. Added extra disappointment. No charge." Funny thing about Gable, underneath all that grumbling was something else. You'd catch glimpses of it sometimes. Like when he'd slip an extra 5 into Betty's purse when she wasn't looking, or when he'd pretend to read his newspaper while actually watching the young couple in the next booth, smiling when they held hands. One morning, maybe 3 weeks ago, he was staring out the window at nothing in particular. The breakfast rush had died down, and I was refilling his coffee for the 3rd time. He grabbed my wrist, not hard, just enough to stop me, and looked me dead in the eye. "You know what we dreamed about in those foxholes, kid?" His voice was different that day. Softer. Wasn't pretty girls or steak dinners. It was simple stuff. Hot coffee that didn't taste like mud. One more sunrise. A bed that didn't have bugs. He let go of my wrist. Turned back the window. People today, they chase complicated happiness. They forgot that simple happiness is the only kind that lasts. I thought about that a lot over the next few days. Simple happiness. Like buying your kid those sneakers without checking your bank balance first. Like not having time your grocery shopping for when the store marks down the almost expired meat. The call came on a Thursday. I was scraping burnt eggs off the griddle when my phone buzzed. Sharon, my ex-wife, the woman who once promised me forever and delivered about 3.5 years. Her voice had that fake sweetness that meant she wanted something. She said they'd be driving through town, and Lily really wanted to see where Daddy worked. Just 5 minutes, she promised. Lily had been asking. I should have known better. Sharon doesn't do anything without an angle. They showed up during the lunch rush. Sharon walked in first, designer purse swinging, wearing sunglasses indoors like she was some kind of celebrity. Behind her was Brad, her new husband, investment banker, perfect teeth, the kind of guy who probably drinks green smoothies and calls them meal replacements. And then there was Lily, my little girl, looking around the diner with wide eyes like she'd entered a foreign country. Brad made a show of studying the menu, holding it with 2 fingers like it might be contaminated. He ordered a salad. We don't really do salads, but I threw some lettuce and tomatoes on a plate and made comments about how interesting it was to see authentic American dining culture. Like we were some kind of zoo exhibit. Sharon didn't even pretend to order anything. She sat Lily down and started her interrogation, but she made it sound like casual conversation. Asked about my hours, my salary, my benefits. All while Lily colored on a kid's menu with broken crayons we keep in a coffee mug. Then came the gut punch. Sharon leaned forward, lowered her voice just enough that Lily couldn't hear, but loud enough that I couldn't miss a word. She asked if I'd thought about the future. About Lily's future specifically. College funds, dental plans, orthodontics. That last word rolled off her tongue like she'd been practicing it. Brad had already set up a trust fund. She mentioned casually. Lily would want for nothing. Private schools, tutors, any college she wanted. Then she asked what I could offer. What my plan was. My plan? My plan was to survive until next Tuesday. The conversation shifted to custody. Not directly. Sharon was too smart for that. But she mentioned how the judge would want to see stability, financial security, a parent who could provide opportunities, not just... She gestured vaguely at the diner, letting the gesture finish her sentence. Brad chose that moment to chime in, said he respected honest work. Really, he did. His own father had worked in a factory. But times were different now, weren't they? Kids needed advantages. Competition was fierce. Did I want Lily to struggle like... And he stopped himself, but we all knew how that sentence ended. The worst part was Lily, sitting there, humming some song from a Disney movie, completely unaware that her future was being negotiated over a sticky Formica table. She looked up at me and smiled, holding up her drawing. It was our diner, but she'd added flowers everywhere and a rainbow on top. In her world, this place was magical. I wanted to tell them both to get out. Wanted to tell Brad that his trust fund couldn't buy what I gave Lily. Time, attention, love that didn't come with conditions or performance reviews. But I just nodded, smiled, played the part of the defeated ex-husband who knew his place. When I brought them the check, Brad's ad salad cost $8. He pulled out a metal credit card, the kind that makes a different sound when it hits the table. Then, while signing, he slipped something under the receipt, a business card. Mahogany-colored, with raised gold lettering. Whitman, Crosby & Associates, Family Law. The tip was $3 on an $8 bill. But that wasn't the insult. The insult was a card, left there like a warning shot. After they left, taking Lily and her rainbow drawing with them, I stood there holding that card. The diner sounds crashed into me all at once. The sizzle of the grill, the clatter of plates, the endless coffee percolating, that fluorescent buzz that never stops. Everything smelled wrong suddenly. The bacon grease I'd never minded before, it smelled like failure now, like a life stuck in place, while everyone else moved forward. The coffee smell that used to be comforting felt suffocating, like it had seeped into my skin, marking me as exactly what I was. I ran my hand across the table where they'd been sitting, still sticky from whatever ancient spill we'd never quite cleaned up. The residue clung to my palm, and I had this crazy thought that would never come off, that I'd be marked by this place forever, branded by minimum wage and broken dreams. The business card in my hand felt heavier than it should. Thick stock, quality paper. Even the edges were perfect, sharp enough to cut. This wasn't just a business card. It was an artifact from another world. A world where problems had solutions that didn't involve choosing between gas money and groceries. I looked around the diner. Betty was building her butter packet tower. Tommy was checking his watch. The coffee was percolating its endless cycle. And I realized something that hit harder than Sharon's words or Brad's condescension. This was it. This was my ceiling. Other people talked about climbing ladders, reaching for stars, breaking through barriers. But some of us We don't get ladders. We get sticky tables and burnt coffee, and the knowledge that our best isn't good enough. Not anymore. Maybe it never was. The card seemed to pulse in my hand. Each raised letter a reminder of everything I couldn't give my daughter. Private schools, trust funds, a future without worry. Hell, I couldn't even buy her those sparkly sneakers she wanted. The kitchen bell dinged. Order up. Another plate of eggs and hash browns. Another cup of coffee that would taste like disappointment. I shoved the card in my pocket, where it sat like a stone, heavy with the weight of inevitability. The lunch rush was picking up. People needed their food, their coffee, their 30 seconds of friendly service. And I needed this job, needed these tips, needed every penny to maintain my every other weekend claim to fatherhood. I grabbed the order, plastered on my service smile, and walked back into the noise and smell and sticky reality of my life. The card pressed against my leg with each step, a constant reminder of the phone call I'd eventually have to make, the surrender I'd eventually have to sign. Mr. Gable watched me from his corner booth, those old eyes seeing everything. But he didn't say a word, just nodded, like he understood that some battles are lost before they even begin. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that harsh, unforgiving light that makes everyone look tired. The coffee maker gurgled. The grill sizzled. The door chimed as another customer walked in, bringing a gust of real air that only made the diner air feel thicker. This was my world. Sticky tables, burnt coffee, and the growing certainty that my daughter was slipping away into a life I could see but never touch. A life behind glass, like those sparkly sneakers in the store window, close enough to see, too far to reach. The business card sat in my pocket like a verdict, its perfect edges cutting into my awareness with every move. Somewhere, Brad and Sharon were driving away in their BMW, planning a future that didn't include me. And here I stood, hands smelling like grease and defeat, holding an empty coffee pot and wondering how long I could pretend this was enough. The answer was simple. Until I couldn't anymore. And that day felt closer than ever. 3 days after Brad's business card started burning a hole in my pocket, I noticed Mr. Gable wasn't himself. He still came in at 7:15 sharp, still took the corner booth, but something was off. The way he held his coffee cup, both hands wrapped around it like he was trying to steal its warmth. The way he'd drift off mid-complaint about the toast being too dark or too light. That morning, a Tuesday, he looked smaller somehow, like someone had let air out of him during the night. His usual bark about the coffee came out as more of a whisper. When I asked if he was feeling all right, he waved me off with a hand that shook more than usual. "Just tired, kid," he said. 87 years is a long time to carry a body around. Betty noticed, too. She kept glancing over at him from her booth, her butter packet tower forgotten. Even Tommy, the mailman, lingered longer than his schedule allowed, pretending to read yesterday's sports section while keeping an eye on the old man. Around noon, when the lunch crowd was thinning out, Gable called me over. Not with words, just that little finger wave that meant he needed something. I figured he wanted more coffee, but when I got there with the pot, he shook his head. He pulled out his wallet, the leather so worn it was soft as cloth, and carefully counted out exact change for his breakfast. Then he did something he'd never done in 6 years. He left a tip, a $20 bill, crisp and new, like he'd been saving it for something special. I tried to give it back, told him it was too much, but he grabbed my wrist again, stronger this time, with purpose. "Listen to me, Jake." His eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in weeks. A man knows when his ticket's been punched. Mine's coming up. I started to protest, but he squeezed harder. "Shut up and listen. I got no one. My son lives in Seattle. Thinks I'm already dead. My daughter married some lawyer. Hasn't called in 3 years. But you show up. Every day you show up. That matters." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a napkin, folded into a perfect square. Military precision. He pressed it into my hand. "This is for you," he said. "For luck. Mine's all used up." Before I could respond, he was shuffling toward the door. I stood there holding the napkin, watching him push through the glass door for what I didn't know would be the last time. The bell chimed his goodbye. I should have opened it right then. Should have called after him. Should have done a lot of things. But the kitchen bell was ringing, and table 6 needed their check. And life has this way of making you prioritize the urgent over the important. I shoved a napkin in my locker, behind my spare shirt and the bottle of aspirin I kept for double-shift headaches. Figured I'd look at it later, maybe after my shift. Gable was probably just being sentimental. Old people did that sometimes. Gave you little keepsakes like they were passing on treasures. He didn't come in Wednesday. Or Thursday. Friday morning. Betty brought in the local paper. She didn't say anything, just slid it across the counter and pointed to a small article on page 3. The headline was only 4 words. Local veteran passes away. The obituary was brief. Arthur James Gable, 87, died peacefully in his sleep Tuesday night. Veteran of World War II, 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Division. Survived by a son in Washington and a daughter in Connecticut. Services private. That was it. 87 years condensed into 3 sentences. A whole life, a whole war, a whole world of experiences reduced to newsprint that would be lining bird cages by Sunday. I read it 3 times before it sank in. Tuesday night. He died the same day he'd given me that napkin. Like he knew. Like he'd come in to say goodbye. Betty was crying quietly in her booth, arranging and rearranging her butter packets. Tommy stood by the register, hat in hand, looking lost. Even the truckers who barely knew him seemed subdued, talking in lower voices, leaving bigger tips. The corner booth stayed empty all morning. I couldn't bring myself to seat anyone there. The weekend passed in a blur. I kept expecting to see him Monday morning, shuffling through that door, complaining about the weather or his joints or the state of the world. But Monday came and went. Then Tuesday. By Wednesday, someone else was sitting in his booth, a traveling salesman who talked too loud on his phone and left sugar packets all over the table. Life moved on. It always does. That's the cruel efficiency of it. Meanwhile, my own life was falling apart in slow motion. Sharon's lawyer had sent a formal letter requesting financial disclosure. 3 pages of legal terminology that basically meant, prove you're not a complete failure as a provider. I needed a second job, but everything required availability I didn't have or skills I'd never learned. A week after Gable died, I was cleaning out my locker. The owner had mentioned maybe cutting shifts, and I figured I should start taking my stuff home, just in case. That's when I found the napkin, wedged behind the aspirin bottle. I almost threw it away. What was I going to do with an old napkin? But something made me unfold it. Inside was a lottery ticket, one of those Mega Millions ones. And underneath it, written in shaky handwriting that must have taken him forever to manage, was a note. Jake, my children forgot what it means to be human. You reminded me. This is for your daughter. Let her have what I couldn't give mine. Arthur Gable. I stared at it for a long moment. Sweet gesture, sure, but lottery tickets were just expensive pieces of paper. The drawing had probably already happened. I almost threw it away again, but the radio in the kitchen was on, and the DJ was doing his morning routine. Speaking of life-changing money, he said, with that fake enthusiasm DJs use for everything, someone in our very own town is about to have a very good day. The Mega Millions jackpot, worth $187 million, was sold right here at the Gas and Go on Market Street. The winning numbers, once again. My hand was already reaching to turn off the radio when he started reading the numbers. 6. The first number on the ticket. 4. The second number matched 2. 44. My hand stopped moving. 16. The kitchen noise faded. The fluorescent buzz disappeared. Everything narrowed down to the DJ's voice and the ticket in my hand. And the final number, 19. 19. I looked at the ticket, back at the radio, back at the ticket. The numbers stared back at me, innocent little digits that suddenly felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. 6. 4. 44. 16. 19. And then it hit me. These weren't random numbers. These were Gable's numbers. His life reduced to 5 digits. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The day he'd landed on Omaha Beach. 6-4-44. 16. The 16th Infantry Regiment. his unit, the big red one. And 19, God, 19, he'd told me once. Late one morning when the diner was empty and the coffee was fresh. He'd been 19 years old when he'd waded through blood and sand of Normandy. 19 when he'd watched his friends die. 19 when he'd learned that some mornings you wake up old, no matter how many years you have left. Can you imagine that, Jake? He'd said. 19 years old and seeing hell. These kids today think they have it tough. The ticket trembled in my hand. No, that was my hand trembling. I tried to put it down, but I couldn't. It felt welded to my palm. The numbers seemed to pulse, each one a heartbeat, a memory, a piece of a man's life transformed into a chance at fortune. The refrigerator hummed. When had it gotten so loud? It sounded like a plane engine, like the bombers Gable must have heard flying overhead in France. The fluorescent lights weren't buzzing anymore. They were screaming. The coffee maker's gurgle sounded like drowning. My legs wouldn't work right. I tried to sit, but missed the chair and ended up on the floor, back against the lockers. The metal was cold through my shirt. Real. Solid. Not like the piece of paper in my hand. That couldn't possibly be real. $187 million. The number didn't mean anything. It was too big. Like trying to understand the distance to stars or the number of grains of sand on a beach. It was monopoly money. Scrooge McDuck money. Not real money that real people had. But it was real. Gable had made it real. He'd taken his worst day, his defining day, and turned it into this. I couldn't breathe right. The air was too thick, like trying to inhale cotton. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. Maybe I was having a heart attack. That would make sense. That would be the Jake thing to happen. Win the lottery and die before claiming it. The ticket was getting damp. Was I crying? I couldn't tell. Everything was blurry, like looking through water, through ocean water, through the Atlantic on June 6, 1944, when boys became men and men became statistics. Somewhere a million miles away, I could hear the kitchen staff calling my name. The lunch rush was starting. Orders were piling up, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, paralyzed by the weight of what I was holding. This wasn't just money. This was trust. This was a man's final act of faith in another human being. Gable had no reason to believe in me. I was just the guy who poured his coffee and took his complaints. But he'd chosen me, chosen my daughter, chosen to believe we were worth this impossible gift. The napkin was still in my other hand, soft, worn, probably from his pocket. How long had he carried this around? How long had he planned this? Let her have what I couldn't give mine. His children who'd forgotten him, who'd written him off, who'd abandoned him to die alone in a small town, with only a bitter diner waitress and a failed father for company. But we'd shown up. Every day we'd shown up. The locker room spun. The ticket weighed more than the earth itself. It wasn't paper anymore. It was responsibility, possibility, transformation. It was every dream I'd abandoned, every hope I'd buried, every prayer I'd stopped praying. Because what was the point? My mouth was desert dry. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The numbers blurred and cleared, like they were trying to disappear, try and become unreal again. But they stayed. 6, 4, 44, 16, 19. D-Day translated into dollars. Sacrifice transformed into salvation. I was aware of my body in ways I'd never been before. The way my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The way my lungs forgot their rhythm. The way every nerve ending fired at once, sending signals my brain couldn't process. This was what shock felt like. Real shock, not surprise or amazement, but the kind of shock that shuts down systems, that makes the world go silent and strange. Time stopped, or maybe it just stopped mattering. I existed in a bubble where past and present collapsed into a single moment. Gable's 19-year-old self on a beach in France and my 34-year-old self on a locker room floor, connected by 5 numbers and an act of incomprehensible generosity. The universe had shifted. Everything I knew, everything I'd accepted about my life and its limitations had just been erased. But I couldn't process it. Couldn't think beyond the way of the ticket. The tremor in my hands, The impossible reality that Arthur Gable, bitter, grumbling, beautiful Arthur Gable, had just changed everything. And I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but sit there, holding the future in my shaking hands, while the refrigerator hummed its mechanical prayer, and the world waited for me to remember how to breathe. It took me 3 hours to remember how to stand up. 3 hours sitting on that locker room floor, holding a lottery ticket worth more than I'd make in 5 lifetimes, trying to convince my body that the world hadn't actually ended, just changed. Completely, irreversibly changed. When I finally made it to my feet, my first thought wasn't celebration. It was fear. Pure, crystallized terror about what came next. Because if there's one thing I'd learned in my 34 years, it's that the universe doesn't hand out free passes. There's always a catch. First thing I did was call in sick for the rest of the week. Told them I had the flu. Then I drove 3 hours to Philadelphia, to a law firm I'd found online that specialized in lottery winnings and trust funds. Sounds paranoid, right? But I'd heard the stories. Family members crawling out of the woodwork. Friends becoming enemies. Money doesn't change people. It reveals them. The lawyer, a woman named Vivian Nakamura, who wore glasses that probably cost more than my car, listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back and said something that chilled me to the bone. Mr. Martinez, in my experience, the money isn't the problem. It's the people who think they deserve it. We set up something called an anonymous trust, the Sergeant's Legacy Trust. Clean, simple, untraceable back to me. Or so we thought. Vivian warned me to tell absolutely no one until everything was finalized. Not my mother, not my best friend, nobody. But here's the thing about small towns. Secrets have a half-life of about 12 hours. The cashier at the Gas and Go, where Gable had bought the ticket, remembered him. Remembered the specific day, because he bought the ticket along with a pack of those butterscotch candies he liked. She'd even joke with him about feeling lucky. When the winning ticket was announced as sold at her store, she put 2 and 2 together. She told her sister. Her sister told her hairdresser. The hairdresser told everyone who sat in her chair for the next 3 days. By the time I got back from Philadelphia, the whole town was buzzing with the story of how old man Gable had won the lottery and died before claiming it. The leap from there, to me, wasn't hard. Everyone knew Gable, and I were close. Everyone had seen him give me that napkin his last day. Betty from the diner had probably mentioned my breakdown in the locker room. Small town math is simple and unforgiving. My phone started ringing. Unknown numbers. Reporters. Distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted to know if the rumors were true. But Sharon moved faster than all of them. I should have known. She'd always been 3 steps ahead, even during our marriage. While I was still trying to figure out how to claim the ticket without causing a riot, she and Brad were already in their lawyer's office. The legal documents arrived on a Tuesday, a preliminary injunction to freeze any lottery payout pending investigation into what they called undue influence and exploitation of a vulnerable elderly person. They weren't suing for the money, not yet. They were just making sure I couldn't touch it until a court decided if I deserved it. The injunction was brilliant in its cruelty. I hadn't even claimed the ticket yet, hadn't seen a penny. But now I needed a lawyer to fight for money I didn't technically have. Vivian Nakamura's retainer alone was $20,000. I had to borrow it from a predatory lender at an interest rate that would make loan sharks blush. Sharon's next move was even smarter. She went public, not to the traditional media. That was old school. She went to a mommy blogger with 2 million followers. Sat down for a tearful interview about how she was just a mother trying to protect her daughter's future. The blog post went viral in 6 hours. Single mom fights for daughter's inheritance after father takes advantage of elderly veteran. The headline was fiction, but the story Sharon told was compelling. How I'd isolated Mr. Gable. How I convinced him his own children didn't care. How I'd manipulated a dying man for my own gain. She'd taken old photos from when we were married, pictures of Lily as a baby, pictures of happier times, and used them to paint herself as a devoted mother fighting against a deadbeat dad who'd stumbled into money he didn't deserve. Then came the GoFundMe page. Justice for Lily. She claimed she needed help with legal fees to ensure her daughter got what was rightfully hers. Within 48 hours, she'd raised $30,000 from strangers who'd never met any of us, but loved a good David versus Goliath story. Except in their version, I was Goliath. The comments section was a massacre. People who didn't know me, had never met me, were describing in detail what they thought should happen to me. Some were creative. Some were just cruel. All of them were absolutely certain I was guilty of something, even if they couldn't agree on what. Walking through town became an exercise in paranoia. At the grocery store, conversations stopped when I passed. At the gas station, the attendant who'd always chat about the weather suddenly found the register fascinating. Even at the diner, my co-workers looked at me differently, like I was a stranger wearing Jake's face. Rosa, who'd worked the evening shift for 15 years, pulled me aside one day. She looked around to make sure no one was listening, then whispered like we were planning a crime. "Jake, people are saying things. Ugly things. They're saying you probably killed him, that you knew about the ticket and, killed him. They thought I'd killed an 87-year-old war veteran for money. The same man I'd served coffee to every morning for 6 years. The same man whose stories I'd listened to, whose loneliness I'd tried to ease, whose friendship had been one of the few bright spots in my daily grind." The local news picked up the story. They interviewed Sharon outside her house. Brad's house, really, but that didn't make for good TV. She wore a simple black dress, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She looked vulnerable, sympathetic. The lighting even caught a tear rolling down her cheek at just the right moment. She talked about how hard it had been raising Lily, how she'd sacrificed everything, how she just wanted what was best for her daughter. She never directly accused me of anything illegal. She was too smart for that. But she didn't have to. The implication hung in the air like smoke. "I just want the truth to come out," she said, looking directly into the camera. "My daughter deserves to know that justice still means something." That night, I sat in my apartment, the same one-bedroom place I'd lived in since the divorce, and watched the interview on the 11 o'clock news. They'd edited it perfectly. Every pause, every sigh, every tremor in her voice designed to make her the hero and me the villain. The reporter ended the segment with what they probably thought was balanced journalism. They mentioned that no criminal charges had been filed, that the Lottery Commission was still investigating, that I hadn't responded to requests for comment, but the damage was done. In the court of public opinion, I'd already been tried and convicted. I turned off the TV and sat in the dark. Outside, I could hear sirens in the distance. Inside, the only sound was the refrigerator humming and the occasional car passing by. This was supposed to be my miracle, my second chance, the answer to every prayer I'd whispered while counting tips and calculating whether I could afford both gas and groceries. Instead, it had become a nightmare where everyone I'd ever known looked at me like I was a monster. The truth didn't matter. The fact that Gable had given me the ticket freely, had written that note in his own shaking hand, had chosen to trust me with his final gift, none of that mattered. Sharon had crafted a better story. A story where she was a wronged woman fighting for a child, and I was the scheming ex-husband who conned a dying veteran. But the legal system, thankfully, deals in facts, not Facebook posts. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning. I wore my only suit, the one for my wedding, though it fit differently now. Stress had carved away pounds I couldn't afford to lose. Vivian Nakamura met me outside the courthouse, her confidence worth every penny of that $20,000 I'd borrowed. "Remember," she said, "let them perform. We'll stick to the truth." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. No jury. This was just a hearing to determine if the injunction should stand. Judge Harrison presided, a man in his 70s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He had the kind of face that had seen every possible version of human stupidity and was no longer impressed by any of it. Sharon's lawyer went first, a theatrical man named Brendan Walsh who gestured like he was performing Shakespeare. He painted me as a predator who befriended a lonely old man for the sole purpose of inheriting his money. He suggested I'd known about Gable's lottery habits, had maybe even picked the numbers myself. Your Honor, he said, voice dripping with righteous indignation. We're not saying Mr. Martinez directly caused Mr. Gable's death, but the timing is suspicious. The circumstances are questionable, and my client's daughter deserves to have these questions answered before $187 million disappears into an anonymous trust. Sharon testified next. She was good, really good. She cried at exactly the right moments, her voice breaking when she talked about Lily's future. She painted herself as a mother bear protecting her cub from a father who'd already failed once at providing for his family. But then it was our turn. Vivian called witness after witness from the diner. Betty went first, her butter packets forgotten as she described the daily ritual between Gable and me, how he'd light up when I walked in, how I'd listen to his stories even when I was slammed with orders, how I'd sometimes pay for his breakfast out of my own tips when he'd forgotten his wallet. Tommy the mailman testified about seeing us together, about the genuine affection between us. He mentioned how Gable had once said I was more of a son to him than his actual son. Rosa talked about my breakdown in the locker room, how I'd been in genuine shock, not the reaction of someone who'd been expecting a windfall. But the killing blow came from Vivian herself. She'd done her homework. She'd tracked down Gable's real children, his son in Seattle who hadn't visited in 5 years, his daughter in Connecticut who'd been trying to have him declared incompetent so she could sell his house. Your Honor, Vivian said, placing documents on the judge's bench. These are emails between Mr. Gable's daughter and a real estate developer discussing the sale of Mr. Gable's home while he was still living in it. And these are court documents from Washington State, showing that Mr. Gable's son attempted to gain power of attorney 3 times, each time rejected because Mr. Gable was found to be a completely sound mind. Then she produced the napkin, Gable's note, in his shaking handwriting. She'd had it authenticated by a handwriting expert. She'd even found other samples of his writing to compare it to. This note, she said, holding it up for everyone to see, was written by a man who knew exactly what he was doing. A man who'd served his country, raised a family, and lived 87 years on his own terms. He chose to give this gift to someone who showed him kindness without expecting anything in return. To suggest that Mr. Martinez somehow manipulated him is not just wrong. It's an insult to Mr. Gable's memory and intelligence. Judge Harrison had been silent through most of the testimony, occasionally making notes, his expression unreadable. When both sides finished, he removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly, then put them back on. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear Sharon's lawyer's stomach growling. I've been on this bench for 23 years. The judge began, his voice gravelly and tired. I've seen every variation of family squabble over money you could imagine, but this is particularly distasteful. He looked directly at Sharon. Mrs. Davidson, your concern for your daughter is admirable, but your suggestion that Mr. Martinez somehow manipulated Mr. Gable is not supported by any evidence presented here today. In fact, the evidence suggests that Mr. Gable's own children showed far more interest in his assets than in his well-being. Then he turned to me. Mr. Martinez, the gift you received comes from a man who clearly valued your friendship. The court sees no reason to interfere with his final wishes. He picked up his gavel. The motion for injunction is denied with prejudice. The term with prejudice means this matter cannot be brought before the court again. The plaintiff's case borders on frivolous, and frankly, the attempt to challenge a veteran's final act of generosity based on such weak arguments is deeply inappropriate. Case closed. The gavel came down with a crack that seemed to echo forever. I looked over at Sharon's table. Her lawyer was hastily packing his briefcase, avoiding her eyes. Brad sat staring at his hands like they held the secrets of the universe. Sharon looked directly at me, and in her eyes was something beyond anger. It was a cold, calculating fury of someone who just learned that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe says no. She would never forgive me for this, for winning, for being chosen by someone who saw value in me when she couldn't. And honestly, I didn't care. The money came through 2 weeks later. After taxes, after Vivian's fees, after paying back the loan shark, I still had more money than I could comprehend. First thing I did was drive to Target. Walk straight to the kids' shoe section. Found those sparkly sneakers Lily had been dreaming about. $68. I bought 3 pairs, one in her current size and 2 for when she grew. The second thing I did was buy the Crossroads Diner. The owner, Gary, had been trying to sell for 2 years. The place was hemorrhaging money. The equipment was falling apart, and the only reason it stayed open was stubbornness and habit. I offered him asking price, cash, no inspection needed. He looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Jake, you sure about this? This place is a money pit." "It's home," I told him. "Some things are worth more than money." We closed in a week. I kept everyone on staff, gave them all raises and actual health insurance. Fixed the freezer that had been making that dying animal sound for 3 years. Replaced the coffee machine with one that didn't require percussive maintenance. Had the vinyl booths reupholstered, still red, still vinyl, but no more duct tape. But the biggest change was the name, Gable's Corner. And on the wall where the old Coca-Cola sign used to hang, I put up a portrait of Arthur Gable in his army uniform, young and fierce, and ready to save the world. The grand reopening was on a Sunday. Lily was with me that weekend, and she helped me flip the sign from closed to open that morning. She was wearing her new sneakers, the ones with the sparkles that caught the light when she walked. She'd barely taken them off since I'd given them to her. We sat in Gable's booth. It would always be Gable's booth, and she had chocolate chip pancakes with extra whipped cream, while I nursed a coffee that actually tasted good for once. The place was packed. Betty was back at her usual table, building her butter packet towers. Tommy was there, actually early for once, reading a newspaper instead of checking his watch. Even some of the people who condemned me on social media showed up, curious about the changes. They'd never apologize, people rarely do, but their presence was acknowledgement enough that maybe they'd been wrong. Lily was swinging her legs on the table, the sparkles on her shoes catching the morning light through the window. Such a small thing, such a simple promise kept. Not a trust fund or a college education or a mansion in the suburbs. Just a pair of shoes that made her feel special. "Daddy," she said through a mouthful of pancake, "this place is different. Good different or bad different?" She thought about it, then smiled. "Good different. It feels happy." I looked around the diner, at the customers laughing and talking, at the staff actually smiling instead of grimacing, at Gable's portrait watching over it all with those keen eyes that had seen the worst of humanity and still chose to believe in kindness. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life would change. I thought money would mean escape, leaving this town, starting fresh somewhere nobody knew my failures. But sitting there in that booth, watching my daughter be happy in a place that had seen me at my lowest, I realized something. Gable hadn't given me an escape. He'd given me the chance to transform what I already had into something worth keeping, to take the sticky tables and burnt coffee and turn them into something that honored both where I'd been and where I was going. The portrait on the wall seemed to approve. Or maybe that was just a light. Either way, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something I'd forgotten existed. Peace. Deep, quiet, unshakable peace. The bell above the door chimed as more customers arrived. Orders needed taking, coffee needed pouring, life needed living. But for just that moment, sitting with my daughter in a dead man's booth in a diner I now owned, watching her joy over a pair of $68 shoes, I understood what Gable had meant about simple happiness. It wasn't about the millions in the bank or the legal victory or the vindication. It was about this, about keeping promises, about showing up, about choosing to see value in things others overlooked. The money was just paper. The real gift was a reminder that sometimes, against all odds, good things happen to ordinary people. And sometimes those ordinary people get the chance to pass that goodness forward. Gable's portrait watched over us all, and I swear, in that morning light, he was almost smiling,